Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It was one of those quiet nights, the kind where everything around you seems to slow down. The world was asleep, or at least it felt that way. I was alone in my living room, curled up on the couch with a book in my hand, but my mind wasn't on the pages. No, my thoughts kept wandering back to something that had happened earlier that day. Something I couldn't quite shake off. I'm Emily, and I'm 48 years old. I've lived in this little neighborhood for most of my life, in the same house that once belonged to my parents. It's a place filled with memories. It's small, quiet, and simple, just like me. At least that's how I used to think. Life has a funny way of shaking things up when you least expect it, doesn't it? My neighbor Richard has lived next door for years. We've always exchanged pleasantries, waved when we saw each other, and shared the occasional conversation over the fence. He's older than me, probably in his mid-60s, and although we didn't know each other all that well, I always respected him. He was one of those people who kept to himself, but in a way that made you feel like you could trust him if you ever needed to. I never expected that one night, a simple chat would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about him. And myself. It started like any other evening. I had just finished dinner and was tiddying up when I noticed Richard standing at the edge of his driveway, looking like he was debating whether to walk over. My curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew it, I found myself at the door. "Hi, Richard," I called out, smiling as I stepped outside. "Evening, Emily," he replied, his voice carrying a touch of hesitation. "Mind if I come over for a minute?" "Not at all. Come on over." I stepped aside to let him in, wondering what had him so serious. He entered, looking a little out of place in my cozy, homey space. Richard wasn't the type of person to seek attention, so seeing him stand there, fidgeting with his hands, made me curious. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting around the room before landing on me. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Something personal, something I've never shared with anyone before." My heart skipped a beat. I had never seen him so uneasy. "Of course," I said, trying to offer some comfort. "What's going on?" Richard shifted his weight from one foot to the other, then finally met my gaze. "You might not believe this, Emily, but I've known you a lot longer than you think." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I used to live in your house. I lived here before your parents did." I felt a strange mix of confusion and disbelief flood over me. You lived here? Before they bought it?" He nodded slowly. "That's right. I grew up here in this house, just as you did." I was stunned. I had never heard anything about this before. How was it possible? The house had been in my family for decades, and I had always assumed it had been passed down through the generations. How had I never known that Richard had once called this place home? Richard continued, sensing my shock. "I know this might be a lot to take in, but I need to tell you something else. There's a reason I've stayed so quiet all these years. A reason I never mentioned it to anyone, not even your parents." He hesitated, as if the next part of his story was something he hadn't told a soul in years. "You see, Emily, the house wasn't just my home. It was something much more special to me than that." I leaned in, sensing that whatever was coming next was going to change everything. "What do you mean?" Richard's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I grew up in this house, but I didn't just live here. I loved your mother." His words hung in the air like a bombshell, and my stomach twisted with confusion. What was he talking about? My mother had been gone for years, but I had never heard anything remotely close to this before. He continued, his eyes filled with a deep sadness that I had never seen in him before. "Your mother was the love of my life, Emily. She was everything to me. I never told her how I felt, though. I was too afraid, too scared to admit it. And by the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late. I felt a rush of emotions sweep over me, shock, disbelief, and something else, something I couldn't quite put into words. Richard wasn't just some neighbor anymore. He was a man with a history, with emotions and regrets that I had never imagined. For a long moment, I didn't know what to say. I had always thought of him as just a friendly neighbor, someone I exchanged small talk with, but now I saw him through a completely different lens. The man standing in front of me wasn't just my neighbor. He was a person with his own past, his own struggles, and his own heartache. I didn't know, I finally managed to say, my voice quiet. I had no idea. Richard nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. I know you didn't, and I didn't expect you to. But I couldn't keep it inside any longer. I needed to tell you, especially since we've both been living here for so long. I could see the weight of his words on his face, the relief and the sorrow. It was a side of Richard I had never known, a side that was raw and vulnerable. I felt a deep sense of empathy for him, and for a moment, it was as if we shared something unspoken, something that connected us in a way that went beyond just neighbors. As I sat there, the weight of the moment settled in. I wasn't sure what to do with this new piece of information, this revelation about my mother and my neighbor. But I knew one thing for sure, things would never be the same. Richard had come to me with a secret, something he had carried for years, and it had shaken me to my core. But it had also opened my eyes to something deeper, something about love, loss, and the passage of time. The night grew quiet around us, and I found myself wondering if this was the beginning of something new, something that would bring us closer, or perhaps pull us apart. But whatever happened next, I knew that the emotional connection we had just shared would stay with me forever. And just as I was about to speak again, I noticed Richard's eyes had softened, as though he was waiting for me to say something more. But instead, I just nodded. And for the first time, we both sat there, understanding each other in a way that words couldn't quite express. The night lingered between us, suspended in the silence that followed Richard's confession. Neither of us knew what to say, and yet, the weight of his words had created an unspoken bond that seemed to stretch the distance between us. I wasn't sure if I should be comforting him, asking more questions, or just sitting in this quiet understanding that had fallen over us. Richard seemed to sense the quiet discomfort in the room. He shifted slightly in his seat, his hands clasped together tightly. I could see that he was nervous, even though his shoulders were slightly slumped, as if the burden he had carried for years had finally been shared, if only for a brief moment. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly, breaking the silence. "I never meant to disrupt your life with this, but I felt like you deserved to know. You deserved to know who your mother was to me." I nodded slowly, my mind swirling. The thought of my mother being loved in such a way, by someone I had always considered just a neighbor, was overwhelming. It wasn't that I didn't understand or appreciate love. It was just that this revelation brought up so many emotions, so many memories that I wasn't prepared to face. "I appreciate you telling me, Richard," I said quietly, my voice betraying the mix of emotions I felt. "But I don't really know what to think. I never knew she had anyone who cared for her like that." Richard looked down, his eyes clouded with regret. "She never knew how I felt. I never told her, not in the way she needed to hear. I guess I always thought there would be time. But there wasn't." He paused, then met my gaze. "I didn't just lose her when she passed away, Emily. I lost the chance to ever tell her how much she meant to me. And that's something I've had to live with." His words hit me hard, and for a moment, I could almost feel the weight of his regrets as though they were mine. My mother had always been strong, independent, and full of life. I had never once imagined that there had been someone in the shadows of her life, someone who had quietly loved her, someone whose heart had been broken by the very love they couldn't share. "I don't know what to say, Richard," I whispered, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I wish I had known to. I wish I had known that she was loved like that." Richard gave a small, sad smile. "There's nothing to say, really. I just wanted to get it off my chest. I've carried it all these years, and I couldn't keep it from you any longer. Maybe it was selfish of me to keep this secret from you, but I thought it would be easier if I stayed quiet." "I understand," I said, my voice steadying. "I do, but this doesn't change anything, Richard. I mean, you're still my neighbor. You're still a part of my life, and that's not going to change just because of this." Richard seemed to relax a little at my words, his shoulders loosening as though the burden had lifted slightly from his chest. "I'm glad you feel that way," he said quietly. "I never wanted this to make things awkward between us. But I also didn't want to leave this part of my life hidden from you forever." I stood up, walking toward the window, where the soft glow of the streetlights cast a faint golden hue across the front yard. I needed a moment to collect my thoughts, to process the rush of emotions that were flooding through me. The room felt a little smaller now, as though the space between us had shrunk, and the walls seemed to hold the weight of the secret we had just shared. Richard's voice cut through my thoughts, low and filled with an emotion I hadn't expected. "You know, Emily, I've always admired you. You've always been so strong, so independent, just like your mother. I see so much of her in you. It's almost as if she's still here, in a way." I turned to face him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. "You really think so?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. "I mean, I've always thought I was so different from her. I never felt like I could live up to her example, especially after everything that happened." Richard nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine with a kind of understanding that felt like it went beyond words. "Your mother was a remarkable woman, Emily. But don't sell yourself short. You carry so much of her with you. In the way you carry yourself, in the way you care for others, in the way you approach life. She would be proud of the woman you've become." I felt a surge of emotion well up inside me, tears threatening to spill over. I hadn't expected this. Richard's words were like a balm to a wound I hadn't realized was still there. The wound of losing my mother, of growing up without her constant presence, without the guidance she had always given me. But now, hearing Richard speak so kindly about her, it felt like I had found a small piece of her that I hadn't even known was missing. I didn't know that," I whispered, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. "Thank you, Richard. I didn't know how much I needed to hear that." He gave a small, soft smile, his eyes reflecting a kindness I hadn't fully appreciated before. "It's the truth, Emily. You don't have to be like her to honor her memory. You're already doing that just by being you." For a long moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of the past hanging in the air between us. But it wasn't the kind of heavy silence that suffocates. It was one that offered comfort, like a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been said, of the deep emotions we had shared. Finally, I broke the silence, my voice soft. "I'm glad you told me, Richard. I really am. And I think we'll be okay. This doesn't change our friendship. We've known each other for too long." Richard's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "You're right, Emily. We've known each other for a long time, and that won't change. I'm just relieved to have finally said it." I walked over to him and placed a hand gently on his arm. "Thank you for trusting me with this. It means more than you know." Richard gave me a warm, sincere look. Then, after a long pause, he turned toward the door. "I'll let you get back to your evening. I just wanted to get this off my chest. Thank you for listening." As he stepped outside and began walking back to his house, I stood there for a moment, watching him go. The air felt cooler now, but not uncomfortable. It was as if everything had shifted, and the world outside had become just a little bit clearer. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment as I took in everything that had happened. I didn't know what the future held, what the rest of our relationship would look like, but I knew one thing for sure. I had learned something about myself, about love, and about the people who touch our lives in ways we don't always expect. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The days following that night were strange, almost surreal. I had expected things to be awkward between Richard and me, but they weren't. Instead, there was a quiet understanding that settled over our interactions. We spoke less, but the silences no longer felt uncomfortable. It was as if an unspoken bond had been formed, one forged in the weight of shared vulnerability. The morning after Richard's confession, I found myself reflecting on everything he had said. The image of my mother, whom I had always seen as a strong, almost untouchable figure, had been shattered and rebuilt in a way that left me both heartbroken and strangely comforted. She had been loved in a way I had never known, in a way that had remained hidden from me for years. And now I had this new piece of her, this secret part of her life that I could carry with me. I found myself more thoughtful, more aware of the way I interacted with the world. Every little interaction, every conversation seemed infused with meaning in ways it hadn't been before. I felt as though I was seeing things through a new lens, one shaped by Richard's words and the quiet revelations of the past. But it wasn't just about my mother anymore. It was about me. I had never fully understood the depths of the emotional weight that carried through my family. We had always been close, but we had never truly talked about the raw emotions that had always simmered beneath the surface. Richard had opened a door that I had never even realized was there. That afternoon, as I sat in the garden, sipping my coffee, I thought about what I had learned about myself. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe I did carry more of my mother's strength and spirit than I had ever realized. I had spent so much of my life comparing myself to her, to the woman she was, that I hadn't stopped to appreciate the woman I had become. The strength I carried had always been mine, even if it had come from a place of grief and loss. It was a quiet afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting a warm glow over everything. The garden had always been a place of peace for me, but today it felt different. The soft rustling of leaves, the gentle hum of the birds, all seemed to echo with the weight of what had been said and what had been discovered. I looked up to find Richard standing in the gate, a hesitant look on his face. He had been quieter than usual these past few days, and though our exchanges had been cordial, there was still an underlying tension. I didn't know if it was because of what had been shared, or if it was because we were both still figuring out where to go from here. "Mind if I join you?" he asked softly, a slight smile on his face. I smiled back, nodding. "Of course. Come on in." Richard stepped through the gate and made his way over to the chair next to mine. He didn't sit right away, though. He paused, looking around the garden, taking in the quiet beauty of the space I had spent so much time tending to. "It's peaceful here," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I can see why you like to spend time here." I nodded, watching him. There was something about his presence now that felt different, less guarded, more open. It was as if we had crossed some invisible threshold, one that neither of us had expected to cross, but somehow it had brought us closer. "It's where I can think," I replied quietly. "Sometimes I need the space to figure things out, to let my mind catch up with my heart." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes soft with understanding. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I've spent a lot of time reflecting these past few days, too." I waited for him to continue, but he didn't. Instead, he sat down beside me, his body language open but still somewhat tentative. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it felt heavy, like we both knew something important was about to be said, but neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking a lot about my feelings for your mother, and about how I never told her how I felt. How I let so much time pass before I finally admitted it." I nodded slowly. "You've been carrying that weight for a long time, haven't you?" "Yeah," he murmured, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Too long. And I've realized something, Emily. I've been holding on to that feeling for so long that it's been hard to see anything else clearly. I think it's time I let go of that, finally. I can't keep living in the past." There was a long pause, and I could feel the tension easing out of him, as if a part of him had finally let go of something heavy. "You're right," I said softly. "You can't keep holding on to the past. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to anyone else. We all need to move forward, even if it's just one small step at a time." Richard turned his gaze to me, and for the first time since I had known him, his expression seemed lighter. "I think I've been afraid of moving on, afraid of what it would mean. But hearing you say that, it feels like I don't have to carry this burden anymore. Like I'm finally free to let go." I reached out and placed a hand gently on his arm. "It's okay to let go, Richard. It's okay to honor your past, but you also deserve to find peace in the present." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Emily. You've helped me more than you know." The air around us felt different now, lighter, more open. The silence that followed was no longer heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Instead, it felt like a shared understanding, a quiet acceptance of where we had been and where we were going. I think we've both been holding on to things we need to let go of, I said quietly, my voice soft but steady. But that doesn't mean we can't move forward. We can still have a future, Richard. A future that's filled with understanding, peace, and new beginnings. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. You're right. And I think that's exactly what I'm ready for. As the evening grew darker, the soft hum of the garden faded into the background. The warmth of the day lingered in the air, and I felt a quiet sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was holding on to the past. I felt like I was finally ready to embrace whatever the future held, whatever new connections, new understandings, and new beginnings might come my way. The weeks following our conversation in the garden passed with an unexpected lightness. Richard and I had come to an understanding, not just about the past, but also about the future. The weight of what had been shared that night seemed to lift from both of us, leaving behind a sense of clarity that we hadn't expected. I spent more time with Richard, though in a different way now. We spoke more openly, but there was no pressure, no expectations. It was as if the walls that had stood between us for so long had dissolved, leaving only the quiet comfort of companionship. There were still moments of reflection, of processing the things we had uncovered, but there was also a deep sense of respect and mutual understanding that had formed between us. One afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, I noticed Richard approaching from his house. He looked different somehow. Lighter, more at ease. His usual hesitant demeanor had faded, replaced by a sense of confidence that I hadn't seen before. "Hey there," he greeted me, his smile warm and genuine. "Hey, Richard," I replied, setting down the small spade I'd been using. "What's up?" He hesitated for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "About everything, about what we've talked about where we've been, and where we're going." I raised an eyebrow, sensing that this was more than just a casual conversation. "And what have you decided?" Richard smiled, though there was a trace of nervousness in his eyes. "I think it's time for me to let go of the past completely. I've been holding on to memories, feelings, and regrets for too long. It's time to live in the present, to appreciate the people around me, and to make the most of what I have." I felt a warmth spread through me as I listened to him. "That's a big step, Richard, but I think you're right. The past doesn't define us, unless we let it." He nodded, the weight of his words sinking in, "And I'm ready to move forward. I don't know exactly where that will take me, but I know I don't want to stay stuck." I smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "You're not alone in this, you know. We all have our own pasts to let go of. But we also have the power to choose how we move forward." Richard's expression softened as he met my eyes. I've realized that sometimes the most important thing is to find peace with where you are, not where you've been." There was a quiet moment between us, the kind of silence that felt comfortable, not forced. We didn't need to say anything more. We both understood what the other was thinking. Over the next few weeks, Richard and I spent more time together. Nothing dramatic, just small moments of connection. We had coffee on the porch, shared stories about our lives, and laughed about the little things. It was a slow, steady shift from the awkwardness of the past to something more familiar, something grounded in shared experience. I began to realize just how much I had grown during this time, how much I had come to understand about myself and the world around me. I had spent so much time focusing on what had happened before, on the parts of my life that I couldn't change, that I had missed the opportunities right in front of me. Richard and I had come to an unspoken agreement. We would continue our journey forward, without the burden of the past holding us back. We were both different now, shaped by the conversations we had shared, the quiet moments of reflection, and the understanding that had blossomed between us. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself growing more comfortable with the idea of letting go of things that no longer served me, whether it was old memories, past regrets, or relationships that had run their course. It was a freeing feeling, like stepping into a new chapter of life, one where I was no longer defined by what had happened, but by what I chose to create in the future. One evening, As we sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the hills, Richard turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Emily," he began, his voice soft but filled with meaning, "I never imagined that I'd find peace again after everything. But I think I've found it here, talking with you, learning from you. I never thought I'd be able to let go, but now I feel like I can." I smiled, a warmth spreading in my chest at his words. "I think we've both found peace in different ways, but it's not about the destination. It's about the journey. And I think we're both on the right path." As the evening air cooled, we sat together, comfortable in our shared silence. The world around us seemed to slow, as if the universe itself was giving us permission to pause and reflect. And in that moment, I knew that we had both grown, both discovered something new about ourselves and each other. We weren't the same people who had started this journey, but that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was exactly what we needed. And as I looked at Richard, I realized that sometimes the unexpected moments in life, the ones that challenge us, that make us rethink everything we thought we knew, are the ones that lead us to the greatest growth. That night, when he had shared his feelings with me, had set something in motion. It had changed both of us, and though we hadn't yet reached the end of our journey, we were no longer afraid to take the next step together. And with that, I learned that even the most unexpected encounters could be the catalyst for something beautiful, something meaningful. It's not always about the grand gestures or the big decisions. It's the quiet moments of understanding, of connection, and of moving forward together. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next.